3 years later, in February 1831, the sign came. There was an eclipse of the sun. The sky was darkened just as his visions in the Bible had predicted. From heaven he heard a voice saying, "Arise and slay the enemies of God with their own weapons." He was so affected that for days he trembled as if he would ague. He had been telling himself for years that he needed disciples, and now he felt their need more than ever. All that time, he had been observing his fellow slaves closely and felt that at least 4 of them could be trusted. Now that the seal had been removed from his lips, he told all to the 4. These recommended 3 others, making a total of 7. At noon Sunday, August 31st, 1831, the 7, Henry, Hercules, Nelson, Sam, Will, Jack, and Nate, went off for a barbecue in the woods, taking a pig, a bag of potatoes, and a jug of cider. Nat could play the guitar, and as he passed his master's mansion, he strummed a spiritual while the others sang. Such carefree mortals, Master Travis felt, certainly were not up to mischief. The conspirators spent all day in the woods, laying their plans and taking a solemn oath that they would gain liberty or die. They planned to attack the whites in Southampton County, capture it as Washington had done during the Revolution, and retreat to the Dismal Swamp. There they would establish headquarters and assemble their forces for a bigger blow. They would strike that night. Cromwell, Washington, Garibaldi, and Bolivar started out with an army of trained soldiers equipped with good weapons. Nat Turner and his vigilant band of 6 had only farm implements as their arms. They returned at midnight. The master and his family were sound asleep. Planting a ladder against a window, Nate mounted it, sneaked into the mansion, and opened the front door for the others. Taking all the weapons they could find, they tiptoed to the master's bedroom. Now for the reckoning with the man who had been so cruel to them. Creeping into the room, Nat struck Travis on the head with a hatchet. The blow glanced off, and Travis leaped to his feet, blood gushing from his wound. When he shouted for help, Will branded him. Mrs. Travis came in, running in. She met the same fate. When Nat and his men left the house, the other 4 members of the family, including the baby, were no more. Nat told himself that it was a wicked thing that he had done, but he silenced his conscience by recalling how the white people had stolen his people from Africa, and how they had mistreated them ever since. He knew also that if the whites got the upper hand, they were going to wreak awful vengeance on guilty and innocent alike. Mounted on Travis's horses, the 7 galloped off to the next plantation, where they killed everyone. Nat was no longer a plain slave. He was now General Cargill. Before morning dawned, he had collected an army of 50. Riding ahead with a mounted guard, he surrounded each mansion, holding it besieged until his foot soldiers arrived to complete the slaughter. In this way, some 50 white persons were killed without a loss of a single man by the attackers. The neighborhood was sparsely settled by whites. Not far away was Jerusalem, the county seat. Nat meant to surprise the inhabitants and kill them before the news of the invasion could reach Richmond or Petersburg. He would seize arms, ammunition, and money. He gave the order to march. Every white person met on the way was killed. When the men came to the gate of the Parker plantation, someone suggested that they go in, kill the master, and pick up more recruits. Nat objected. Time was pressing. They must hurry on to Jerusalem. But the majority thought otherwise, and Nat reluctantly yielded. 40 of the men started off for the mansion 6 miles away. Nat, with the remainder, stayed behind to block the roadway. Hours passed, and the men did not return. Nat started off in search of them. While he was away, a body of armed white men appeared. The rebels were just retreating when Nat and the others returned. The whites, sure that they could bluff the Negroes, shouted to them to drop their guns on penalty of a whooping. Nat, reminding his men that they were no longer creatures of the banjo or the shakedown, but soldiers of Christ fighting for the right, gave the order to fire. When the smoke cleared, the whites were fleeing in disorder, leaving behind several of their number, dead or wounded. Nat dashed after cutting them down. The survivors ran into a strong body of white reinforcements. In the encounter, they followed, Nat's force was beaten and fled with 20 others. Still determined to attack Jerusalem, he urged his men to follow him, but they hesitated. He then picked up 20 more men and attacked the plantation of Major Rhythm. When he reached the plantation of Dr. Hunt the next day, he found the whites were there organized, and after a skirmish, he was forced to retreat. Telling his men to scatter, he instructed them where to meet that night. No one came, however. Nat was alone. Knowing that it was the end, he took to the woods. In the meantime, the news had reached Richmond and the United States government had been appealed to. It had sent 2 warships, the Warren and the Natchez, to the scene with 800 Marines. The Virginia State Militia was also summoned into force. An indiscriminate slaughter of blacks. Fully 100 were killed the first day alone, others were tortured for secrets they were supposed to know. 600 men with bloodhounds started after him. Digging a hole under a pile of fence rails in the woods, he hid there for 8 weeks. At last, he was cornered by accident. He had left some fresh meat in his hiding place, and while he was away, a dog, attracted by its scent, came in and ate it. The next day, the dog, who happened to be out with a group of slaves, came back. Nat was in the hole and the dog barked loudly. The slaves came up to investigate, and Nat, thinking that they had come to search of him, begged them not to betray him. Learning who he was, they fled in terror, running straight to their master to tell the news. A posse of 1,000 armed men set out to look for him. They finally discovered him on top of a tree where he had taken refuge. When they threatened to shoot, he came down and gave himself up. A few days later, he was brought to trial. Nat faced his accusers with courage. Thousands came to catch a glimpse of the man who had spread the fear of insurrection in all the slave states. Nat boldly acknowledged his deeds and told of his hope of freedom to his people. His lawyer, Gray, said, clothed with rags, covered with chains, yet daring to raise his manacled hands to heaven. With a spirit soaring above the attributes of men, I looked at him, and my blood froze in my veins. He was hanged on November 11, 1831, walking serenely to the gallows, convinced to the end that he had obeyed the dictates of the voices within, the voice of God, and the right. His revolt brought many sleepless nights to slaveholders and the whites in all the slave states for years to come. How could they be sure that on their plantation there was not another Nat Turner waiting for a chance to butcher them? Nat Turner, with his talents, suppressed by servitude, is surely a case of one who's capable of being a great service to America, to humanity, but whose genius, ignored by a most brutal system, was diverted into an instrument of ruthless slaughter and revenge. Between 55 and 61 whites were killed in the outbreak here.
Government is trapping the system.